Hi and welcome back to The Bearded Historian. Before we get started on this week's episode, I'd like to quickly address a couple of points that have come up from your comments. But in case you're simply not interested in that or are just too eager to see the actual video, or the one that was advertised in the thumbnail, please just click on the card that I'm putting up on the screen here to jump to the content right away. First off, let me say that the reception of my videos, despite their flaws, and there have been flaws, has been amazing, and I can't begin to describe how motivating it is to me to see and read all your comments and the kind feedback that you've been giving me so far. So please keep that coming, and I'll continue to try and reply to as many of you directly as I can. As some of you have rightfully pointed out, the channel has seen a long period of inactivity. This has been due to me moving around the European landscape for a number of personal reasons. Unfortunately, this has left preciously little time for YouTube or anything to do with this channel. I still try to answer your comments, but that was about the full extent of it. But now that I'm settled back in, I'll definitely start working on uploading videos more frequently again. That being said, when I uploaded my last video early this year, the channel was sitting at 97 subscribers, and by now we have well surpassed the 2000. So a massive thank you and shout out to all of you who have recently joined us, and especially those of you who've been patient enough to stick around for so long. If there's one common thread among all of your comments, it's this one. And believe you me when I say I'm with you here. Rewatching some of my older videos, I'm surprised at myself for not spotting the various audio issues any earlier. My voiceovers were far too quiet, and some of the audio effects were painfully loud in comparison. A new microphone is on the way, but for now I've just tried to make some software adjustments and hope the results speak for themselves. I've also added some much requested background music. Let's see how that goes. But as always, please just let me know what you think and how the changes are working for you. As many of you have correctly pointed out, I'm not a native English speaker, and my style of narrating these videos does not only reflect that, but also has a slower pace compared to some other channels. I'm afraid there's little I can and want to change about that, and the general sentiment appears to be that this also isn't much of a problem. In case you do find me difficult to understand though, I can only recommend you activate YouTube's very own subtitle functionality. It's rather accurate in auto-generating subtitles for my voiceovers and might help some of you. That being said, if there's a native speaker among you who's got the right tech at home and long felt the urge to take a shot at doing some YouTube voiceovers, be my guest and reach out. I'm always grateful and open to any help that is offered. But that's enough of that. Let's get to why you've clicked on this video to begin with. In line with my more active plans for the next year, I wanted to introduce a new segment that I'd like to call This Week in Archaeology. The idea is to take one or two key finds that archaeologists worldwide have publicized in a given week and put them in the spotlight, while also adding a little context. And for this very first issue, we've got a true gem that also happens to link in nicely with one of my previous videos. According to recent reports, an excavation led by archaeologists of the University of Leicester has revealed first convincing evidence identifying the initial landing site for Caesar's armed incursion into Britain. This is spectacular for a number of reasons, not least because over the past decades historians thought to have had a good idea of where Caesar had landed his troops, but never once considered the recently discovered site as a viable option. But before we look at the particulars of this exciting news, let me provide you some brief context. As I'm sure most of you are aware, one of Caesar's biggest legacies was his written account of the Gallic Wars, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico. In these first-hand reports, Caesar provides a detailed description of his campaigns to subdue the tribes of Gaul and ultimately integrate their territories into the Roman Republic. And it is exactly during those campaigns that Caesar also highlights his concerns with the Celtic tribes of Britain. If his word is to be believed, they provided aid and refuge to the embattled Gallic tribes, and through these actions were more than just a nuisance to Caesar's ambitions in the region. So he soon began to plan a military expedition to the island in order to eliminate any immediate threats and also relieve some pressure of his efforts in Gaul. It is questionable if he ever intended to achieve anything beyond that, but it has to be mentioned that some historians believe an actual invasion of Britain, rather than just a show of force and a punitive expedition, may have also been on Caesar's mind. Regardless of his ultimate motivation, in 55 BC, Caesar undertook a first expedition across the British Channel into territories previously untouched by the Roman Republic. Without going into too much detail, let it suffice to say that the expedition bore mixed results. Caesar had faced an opposed landing, followed by a number of skirmishes, during which he also lost some of his ships to a surprise attack. Ultimately, Caesar abandoned his beachhead before the onset of winter and returned to Gaul. He had been able to obtain a number of hostages from local tribes and negotiated unstable treaties with representatives of the regional powers, but beyond that, he had fallen short of achieving anything of lasting effect. And so it wasn't long before plans were drawn up for a second invasion to happen in the summer of 54 BC. This time, Caesar was determined to avoid mistakes made the previous year and assembled a much larger force of 5 legions and around 2,000 cavalrymen. Including support and supply ships, his fleet is said to have numbered 800 vessels and must have made for an impressive sight. A D-Day in reverse, if you like. Again, I don't mean to bore you with all the details here, and they're amply documented if you want to find out more. But in summary, it can be said that the second attempt was considerably more successful. Caesar's forces chose the same landing site as the previous year and established a base of operations from which they ventured much further into Britain than just the year before. After a number of smaller and larger engagements, Caesar's main adversary, the British warlord Cassivellaunus, surrendered and hostages were provided as well as an annual tribute agreed on. Furthermore, Caesar was able to install an exiled British prince by the name of Mandubracius as the ruler of the Trinovantes tribe in southeastern Britain. While the direct nature of their relationship can be debated, it has to be assumed that this action resulted in at least a temporary end to hostilities and a more favorable situation for Rome. Eager to return to his efforts in Gaul, Caesar soon after abandoned all posts in Britain again and transported his combined forces back to the mainland. Now, you may ask, why is all this context necessary? Well, first of all, it's always good to have a basic understanding of the contemporary historical realities before looking at the rather specific findings of any archaeological excavation. But more importantly, it needed to be highlighted just how big of a military effort this must have been. 800 ships, more than 20,000 soldiers, and an invasive military agenda that shaped the political landscape and set a precedent for the events to follow that would see Britain fall under Roman rule and influence the history of the region for centuries to come. There is a certain element of frustration in knowing these pivotal events have taken place, but not being able to pinpoint them on a map with certainty. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself, and we certainly need to give the team of the University of Leicester time to fully catalogue, process and publish their findings, but there's no reason not to be excited. What they have communicated so far sounds promising and highly interesting, no matter what their final verdict may be. So, what was found exactly, and how did this come about to begin with? Well, while excavating land ahead of a new road project, and actually let me stop myself here for a moment and give you a quick side note as someone with a background in archaeology. Kudos are due for large-scale construction projects and the regulations that go hand in hand with them. Funding for archaeology has always been a difficult subject, and one might argue that archaeology's financial prime has passed in the 20th century. But thanks to existing rules, most major construction projects have to first have performed some form of archaeological assessment before planning permissions will be granted. In the United Kingdom, these are called environmental impact assessments, or EIAs in short. And while they can mean a massive headache for developers and contractors, they often are a bliss for archaeologists, as they allow surveying areas that we otherwise either wouldn't have looked at or wouldn't have gotten the funding or permission for. But enough of that, I do apologize for rambling on. So, in preparation for this particular road project, in as early as 2010, the archaeologists discovered a defensive ditch which, using pottery, they were able to date to be from the mid-1st century BC. This piqued their interest and led to further funding and excavations in 2016 and 2017, the excavations we're hearing about now. As part of these excavations, a fortification system covering an area as large as 20 hectares was identified along the shallow Pegwall Bay in Kent. The deep ditch had striking similarities to defensive works found at Alesia in France, where Caesar had fought his pivotal battle against the Gauls under Vercingetorix, thus making it look distinctively Roman in nature. Furthermore, the floor plan of the fortification's entrance area bears similarities to a Roman fort found at Hermeskeil in Germany, which was conclusively dated to be from 51 BC. But as if this wasn't enough evidence already, the archaeologists also found fragmented human bones bearing what appears to be battle injuries, and an assortment of iron weapons, including a distinctly Roman javelin, the kind of throwing spear or pilum belonging to the standard equipment of every Roman legionary. So it can already be said with a reasonable amount of certainty that the site in Pegwall Bay must have been Roman in nature and dated to around 50 BC. Both are good matches for Caesar's incursion into Britain, and we'd be hard-pressed to come up with an alternative explanation for what they might have been otherwise. But why is it then that this comes as such a surprise to historians? Why wasn't this potential landing site with its long sandy beaches and open areas considered in the research discourse until now? Well, the answer is a surprisingly simple one, but rather than having me paraphrase it, let me read you a quote from Dr. Andrew Fitzpatrick, a member of the team leading the excavations.
The site at Ebbsfleet lies on a peninsula that projects from the southern tip of the Isle of Thanet. Thanet has never been considered as a possible landing site before, because it was separated from the mainland until the Middle Ages. However, it is not known how big the channel that separated it from the mainland was. The Wansum Channel was clearly not a significant barrier to people of Thanet during the Iron Age, and it certainly would not have been a major challenge to the engineering capabilities of the Roman army.
So there you have it. The site at Ebbsfleet and Pegwall Bay most likely provides us with a first glimpse at the defensive efforts Caesar mustered in order to protect his beached fleet and the considerable ordnance that was required for an endeavour of such a scale. I, for one, am very excited about these new findings and hope that some of you share the sentiment. This episode beautifully illustrates the enticing results archaeology can produce when working hand in hand with the wider historical research, and will most likely end up rewriting parts of the already told story about Caesar's military adventures in Britain. I want to close this on a note referencing one of my earlier videos. In my conclusion to the video about Roman Ireland, I had spent some time talking about the very fact that we've still not found any archaeological traces of Caesar's base camp in Britain. And I drew the comparison to a lack of archaeological evidence for any Roman expedition into Ireland. I'll be the first to admit when an argument of mine needs to be challenged, and this is one of these situations. With the recent findings in Kent, my comparison to Agricola's potential incursion into Ireland has lost its validity. Though I would argue that the topic as such is still a very interesting one at its core, and it's still valid to ask the question we looked at in that particular video. Now, that is enough for today. Thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this closer look at an archaeological topic, and as always I invite you to leave a comment and a like, or a dislike for that matter. I've added some additional resources and reading material in my video description in case you do want to take a closer look at this yourself. Until next time.